Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures, Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Sunny Vanderstar. Today's topic is everything you need to know, Yellowstone Ultimate Wolf and Wildlife Safari. And it'll be presented by two of our fabulous Nat Hab Expedition Leaders, Drew McCarthy and Corbin Hawkins. Guys, thanks so much for being here today. I will turn it right over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sunny. Appreciate you having us. And welcome, everyone. We are excited for the upcoming season, and we want to dive right into this and just let you guys know, what you need to, all you need to know approaching this season. As Sunny mentioned, my name is Corbin Hawkins. I am the Field Operations Manager for U.S. National Parks here at Natural Habitat Adventures. I've been working with Nat Hab since 2014 in a variety of capacities, whether that's ground logistics in Winnipeg for our polar bear trips or guiding Yellowstone trips, or where I'm at now with our field operations management related to all things U.S. National Parks. And I'm very excited today to introduce to you Drew McCarthy. He is our lead expedition leader for Yellowstone winter season. And I'll hand it over to him here and let him kind of give you an insight to who he is.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining. Thanks, Corbin and Sunny, for the introduction to today's Daily Dose of Nature. Again, my name's Drew McCarthy, and coming to you today from Teutonia, Idaho, which is right on the far eastern side of the state of Idaho, right up against the Teton Mountains. I've been living here since 2015. I'm originally from Alaska. I grew up in Anchorage, but I moved down here in 2011. I've been leading winter trips in Yellowstone since that time. Other expeditions I lead with Natural Habitat. I lead the Base Camp Greenland program, as well as Summer Yellowstone, and then of course Winter Yellowstone. So I'm excited to give you all a little bit of a preview as to what is coming with our winter wolves and wildlife trip. And yeah, let's get started.
Cool, thanks, Drew. So first things first, I just want to address the elephant in the room that, over the past few years anyway, this has been the elephant in the room. And I just want to talk about our COVID policies and protocol really quick, and then we'll get into the good stuff. If you've been on our site recently, the Nat Hab website, you will have found some information regarding our day one testing protocols. Any trips starting on or after January 1st, we are going to do away with those testing protocols. As far as COVID protocols go, we have changed nothing else in that regard. But we will no longer require that day one testing. So what you see in front of you here is just a kind of simple graphic of what we call our combination intervention approach. This is a 4-step approach that includes masking. It includes kind of elevated personal sanitation, elevated sanitation in general, and then social distancing. As far as masking is concerned, we defer to the rules and regulations set forth by the national parks that we are operating in. We'll continue to do so in that regard. We do provide hand sanitizer in all of our vehicles. We make sure that all of our gear is being thoroughly cleaned on a daily basis. And then really the benefit of Yellowstone in the winter is that social distancing comes quite easy. And so we'll follow those 4 approaches. And we'll go from there. So any questions on COVID, we can address that towards the end of the trip. But I did mention there at the end about social distancing, and it's actually something that makes our Yellowstone winter trips quite special, at least for me anyway. This is a park that sees over 4 million visitors annually, and in the winter time, it's well under 1 million. So you go from one of the more crowded parks in the US in the summer, and then the winter you kind of get this beautiful snowy winterscape kind of all to yourself. And I think it's a really unique way to see this place and enjoy it without all of the the tourism that comes with the summer season. Drew, what about you? What makes this place so special for you in the winter?
Well, for me, I think just the opportunity, as you said, to experience this incredible landscape at a period of time when Yellowstone kind of sleeps. I once did a talk with a park planner, and that person's expertise was winter use in Yellowstone, and the park really does manage Yellowstone during the winter for this sort of very calm, lower visitation period. So, you know, from the standpoint of a naturalist, I'm always very excited to see animals living during this time of the year when some animals are really struggling and other animals are actually thriving due to the winter conditions. So we get to experience that wildlife, present those challenges and those life histories to our guests. This picture down on the lower right is me holding a little shrew that came out onto all of our feet as we were set up watching wolves through a spotting scope. So to have that opportunity to be watching bison and wolves and then have the smallest of the animals present is just really special. And then also the chance to just get out away from the road systems and do a little bit of snowshoeing, walk on some boardwalks. I just love being in Yellowstone during the winter.
Yeah, it is a beautiful place to be. I wish I was in there more often. I'm a little jealous of your time you get to spend in there. But tell us a little bit, Drew, about the location at large, right? We can see you here in Yellowstone, but what about the bigger picture?
Sure. Well, you'll hear your expedition leaders often refer to the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem, or the GYE. This trip really travels through the heart of the GYE. So whether you're starting in Bozeman or whether you're starting in Jackson, the itinerary is exactly the same. It just follows a different sequence. And you can see here, we'll be traveling really through two states, the state of Montana and then Wyoming. Idaho is considered part of the GYE. But it's not a section of the park that many visitors get to experience, and we won't be going into the Idaho section of Yellowstone. The GYE is a roughly 23 million acre area. It's not purely federal land. Some of it's state land, some of it's tribal land, some of it's private land. But this contiguous set of land management units represents one of the most intact temperate ecosystems on the planet. And this itinerary travels right through the heart of that ecosystem. Let's go to that next slide. All right, so we'll be spending a good portion of the trip traveling through Yellowstone. And I want to highlight the places that will be overnighting over the course of the trip. So aside from Bozeman and Jackson, sort of on the perimeter of the park, we'll be staying in Cook City, Montana. You can see that in the upper right of our map here with the blue star. Cook City, it's really kind of a winter recreationalist paradise. Whether it's wildlife watchers or snowmobilers or skiers, Cook City just vibrates during the winter with activity. And we choose Cook City as a location to stay during this trip because you're right on the boundary of the park. It puts us right close to the heart of the wildlife watching activity in what's called the Northern Range. So Cook City, we'll spend 2 nights in Cook City on this itinerary. It's worth noting that Cook City is actually cut off from the rest of Montana except through that route through Yellowstone during the winter months. So in the summer, there's multiple roads into Cook, but in the winter, the only way to get to Cook City is traveling through the Northern Range of Yellowstone. This is the community that was also heavily impacted by the floods last spring. At that time, Cook City truly was isolated due to the damage that occurred along the roads in the Northern Range of Yellowstone. I should mention that those roads are back up and running. The Park Service did a phenomenal job getting those roads back up and Cook City connected to the rest of the park. But I do want to give people a heads up during the trip. There could be some delays still due to construction that's ongoing. You could see vehicles alongside of the road that are related to construction. So aside from Cook City, we'll be staying at the Old Faithful Snow Lodge for 1 night on this itinerary. The Old Faithful Snow Lodge is just an incredibly special place to stay. It's the only accommodation in the park this winter. The Mammoth Hotel, which is near Gardner, Montana, is actually closed this winter. So the Old Faithful Snow Lodge is truly the only accommodation available during the winter months. It is right at the heart of the Upper Geyser Basin. So, within a stone's throw of where you're going to lay your head is the Old Faithful Geyser, and we'll talk more about that as the trip, as our presentation continues. And then after we leave Yellowstone, we'll be traveling into Grand Teton, or if you're a Jackson departure, you'll be traveling through Grand Teton first. Grand Teton, of course, winter views of the Tetons themselves are incredible, and this itinerary spends plenty of time allowing opportunities for photography. The other thing that's unique about this stage of the trip is we've also got the National Elk Refuge. And so aside from the national park, below and to the right, you can just barely see in this map the National Elk Refuge, which is literally right on the doorstep of the town of Jackson. So we'll spend time in the Elk Refuge as well as in Grand Teton National Park.
Thanks, Drew. Let's hop into some of the nitty-gritty details of this. I think what I'd like to do is just for a moment, let's pretend like I don't know this itinerary and I don't know what to expect. So whether or not my trip starts in Jackson or Bozeman, can you walk me through what I can expect when I land in either of those places?
Sure. Well, both the Bozeman Airport and the Jackson Hole Airport are relatively small airports. There's just one section that is baggage claim in each of those airports, and there's 3 or 4 carousels in each airport. In the Bozeman Airport, which is the lower left image here, you can see there's a set of stairs. All arrivals will come down those stairs, and there'll be a Nat Hab Expedition Leader waiting for you with a sign that'll have our Nat Hab logo as well as our dual WWF logo. And we'll be waiting right at the base of those stairs, and we'll accompany you over to the baggage claim. Jackson is similar. In that image to the right, you can kind of see at the far end of that hallway or baggage claim area, there's a river notated on the wall there, graphic, and that's where your expedition leader will be standing, again, with the same sign to greet you. One thing I want to remind all of our travelers is how important it is to have luggage tags on your luggage, even at this stage of the trip. If I don't, I'm not going to know what you look like, but if you've got one of those Nat Hab tags on your backpack, I'm going to spot one of those tags from a mile away. So very manageable airports, and very, very nice newly remodeled airports at both locations.
So essentially, you're looking for the logo when we get off the plane here.
Both of you, I'll look for your logo on your luggage tag, and you look for mine.
Exactly. And what will we be doing after we get out of the airport, Drew?
So we have our vehicles on site, both in Jackson and in Bozeman, and it's either going to be one of our Sprinter vans, which you can see on the left in that image with the Tetons, or if you arrive in Bozeman, it'll be one of our 4-wheel drive turtle top vans, shown here on the right side of this slide. Both airports are a short scenic drive away from their respective towns. 10 minutes at most shuttle ride to town.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting here, Drew, as well, is that the Sprinter vans there on the left have the roof hatches of which you can pop out of to take a look. And then the vehicle on the right, this was actually kind of been re-outfitted since this picture was taken. We'll have vans that have sort of a moon roof towards the front and the top of the vehicle, just in case you were wondering. And where will we be headed in those vehicles, Drew, once we leave the airport?
So Nat Hab had selected 2 excellent hotels to be based out of, depending on whether you're a Bozeman or a Jackson departure. In Bozeman, we'll be traveling from the airport to the Armory Hotel. And then in Jackson, we'll be traveling to the Lexington. Now, I want to mention that both of these hotels are right in the heart of their respective towns. So a short walk from shopping, from dining, from ATMs, from nightlife, should you choose to partake. You can see in the picture on the right of the Lexington, literally Snow King Ski Resort is just down the road from the Lexington. So both of these towns, Bozeman and Jackson, Wyoming, have a lot of character, a lot of Western charm, and particularly if you arrive early, there's time to stroll into town and get a taste for those respective sites.
Yeah, and I recommend you do so if you can afford the time. Both beautiful places to visit. So Drew, you kind of touched on the other accommodation throughout the trip when you're going over our maps there, but maybe you can go a little further in depth on where we'll be staying other than those first 2 you just mentioned.
All right, well, on this itinerary, as I mentioned, we spent 2 nights in Cook City, which again is in that very northeast corner of Yellowstone National Park. And when we're in Cook City, we stay at the Super 8. Now, the Super 8 may not be what you normally would expect from a Nat Hab departure, but I can say that the reason for staying at the Super 8 is that it puts us, again, as I said, right at the boundary of where the wolf watching and the wildlife watching is concentrated during the winter months. But I also want to mention that Cook City has a lot of character on its own. The Super 8 is right on the main street through town. There's interesting shops and restaurants. There's bars if you choose to have a drink that have a lot of relevance to this part of the world and traveling through Yellowstone in the winter. Also, we have a long-standing relationship with the owners of the Super 8, and it's really nice to pull up with our guests and see a smiling face I've seen for years. They take very good care of us in Cook City. And then we spend one night at the Snow Lodge, which again, as I said, that's right in the heart of Yellowstone, right at the Geyser Basin. I want to highlight that as well as being right next to Old Faithful, it's also right next to the Visitor Center. So, we have an afternoon and a morning at the Snow Lodge. So there's opportunities to, at our leisure, walk and visit the Visitor Center, spend time at Old Faithful and the other geysers that are so densely located near the Upper Geyser Basin. Also at the Snow Lodge, there's groomed ski trails, there's opportunities for snowshoeing, there's ice skating, their wintertime decorations for the holidays are really, really beautiful. So it's quite a fun place to stay.
Yeah, I want to draw special attention, just really quick, like a special mention anyway, that our partners in Cook City, the owners of the Super 8 and the sort of adjoining restaurant where we'll be having some meals, after the flood this summer, they operated the entire summer at about 30% of their normal summer tourism capacity. So they took a massive hit. Suffice to say that they are really excited to have us back. And it's really cool to be able to work with, although it is a Super 8, it is a local family there in Cook City that kind of runs the operation there, inclusive of the meal right next door, which we'll kind of talk about here in just a second. But just so you know, when you're heading back into Cook City, you are really bringing life back into that town, which we're excited to do. So speaking of meals, Drew, why don't you tell us kind of sort of what meals look like throughout the trip here?
Sure. Well, I'll say in general, the food and the portion sizes in Montana and Wyoming are large, but it's important to remember that we are traveling in the winter and we're spending a lot of time outside in cold temperatures. And so staying well hydrated and staying well fed is going to be critical to staying healthy on the trip and staying warm and being happy. So portion sizes are large. Just a heads up, you may figure out that it works best to split a meal with your partner or your traveling companion or another participant on the trip. But like all Nat Hab trips, we've got some really special restaurants lined up to keep us fed and nourished during the course of the trip. This picture in the lower left is from the Wonderland Cafe, which has been a partner with Nat Hab for quite a number of years. It's in Gardner, Montana. Really excellent local food. During the course of this trip, we also have we have a few field meals. We have 2 field meals that we do during the days of the trip that we're in snow coaches traveling through the interior of the park. So we utilize National Park Service warming huts. That's what this image on the right is indicating. So you can see they're small, and so our group will have to head into that warming hut and enjoy our to-go lunches in the warmth of those warming huts. One thing that's nice is that at some of the warming huts, there's hot drinks available, so we'll have the opportunity to drink coffee, cocoa. Also, there's often a National Park Service interpretive ranger present that can answer questions. This particular warming hut, they've got animal pelts, and it ends up being a really great place to base out of. Now, occasionally we'll arrive at these warming huts and they'll be quite crowded. There might be a snowmobile group there. There could be another guided wildlife viewing group. And so very occasionally, we may actually eat in the snow coaches. So you can expect or be prepared to potentially eat your field meal while seated in the snow coach, in the warmth of the snow coach.
Okay, thanks for that, Drew. Can you expand a little on what that might look like? What is a snow coach for those listeners who may have not heard of or know anything about a snow coach?
What is a snow coach? Well, first of all, one of the things I love about traveling in Yellowstone during the winter is it's a little bit like Star Wars. particularly The Empire Strikes Back, when you've got all these random vehicles zooming past in this winter magical landscape, and the trees are burdened with snow, and there's bison feeding on the side of the road, and all manner of vehicles travel through the winter roads of Yellowstone. What I mean by winter roads is in the summer, the roads are open to wheeled vehicles and to the public. But in the winter, most of the roads in Yellowstone are actually closed to the public and only allow what they call over-snow travel. So over-snow travel would be snowmobiles, which most of you are familiar with. There was one shown in that last picture, or a snow coach. And so a snow coach can be a number of different forms of over-snow transport. What I have pictured here are two of the types of snow coaches that we likely will use while traveling through the interior of the park. Now, these snow coaches are operated by our partners. So as an expedition leader, this is a chance for me to take my hands off the steering wheel and actually get to be a passenger along with you in the snow coach. The operators that we work with provide really modern, really quiet snow coaches as much as possible. So these sort of low pressure, high volume monster truck style tires are designed to travel over that packed snow surface that the Park Service provides for winter visitors to travel on during the winter months. And I'll also mention that those snow roads get packed every night. So if there's a snowstorm, the Park Service gets out there in the early morning and smooths out the road, the snow surface, so that snow coaches and snowmobiles can travel.
Yeah, funny that you mentioned Star Wars, Drew. I don't know if you know this, but there's actually some segments of Star Wars that were shot at Mammoth Hot Springs, which you guys will get a firsthand look at. If you're familiar with Star Wars, that's the planet of Tatooine, which, not much unlike Yellowstone, is freezing. It's a bitterly cold place on occasion. And because of such, we need to be concerned about our gear and our clothing and what to wear. Drew, you want to sort of highlight some of those important things to wear and gear and all things related to the cold?
Sure. Yeah, so I'll talk about this subject kind of in two phases. The first phase will be what does Nat Hab provide for you as a participant on the trip? And then the second would be, what are you expected to bring? And how can you stay comfortable while traveling through this winter environment? So this slide depicts one of the pack boots that we have available for you. You'll get those boots fitted to you after the welcome dinner, whether you're in Bozeman or in Jackson. A pack boot is a kind of boot where you can actually pull the fleece liner out of the boot. And that's actually something that's it makes the boots warmer, and it also lets you dry those boots out in the evening when you're back in your hotel room. So one of the things that's really important to keeping your feet warm is keeping the boots dry. So pulling those liners out at night, letting them dry. Also, Nat Hab provides parkas. So you can see in the lower left, it's one of our guests with her parka up on a rather cold and windy day. These parkas are going to be kind of your outermost shell of protection from the elements. So they're minimally insulated. Again, they have a good insulated hood. They've got a fur ruff. They've got plenty of large pockets to put iPhones and gloves and hand warmers. Oh, and hand warmers. Nat Hab also on our trip, we've got plenty of these toe warmers and hand warmers that we'll hand out both at the welcome presentation and we'll have throughout the trip. You can put those in your boots, you can put those in your gloves to help keep your hands warm. Other gear that we provide binoculars. We also have spotting scopes that we'll be setting up at wildlife viewing opportunities. We provide trekking poles. So on this image to the right, you can see this is a snowshoe outing. We've got trekking poles that will be traveling with us on every stage of the trip, whether the boardwalks are icy and slippery or whether they're packed deep snow. We've got these trekking poles available to keep you safe and upright while traveling on these uneven surfaces. I know a lot of our travelers have their own trekking poles, and you're welcome to bring your own, but I'll say it's one of the more awkward things to travel with, and the TSA is not always friendly to trekking poles. So we've got plenty. You can use our gear should you want to. Let's just see if I missed anything. Ice grippers. On the subject of icy conditions, Usually in the interior of Yellowstone, there's plenty of snow, and our bigger issue is deep, loose snow. But occasionally, in some of the geyser basins, it can be very icy because, of course, a geyser in a hot spring is producing lots of steam, producing lots of hot water. That geyser is erupting. That hot water falls onto the boardwalks, and it can be complete ice. So we also will provide for you ice grippers. These are a bit like Yak Tracks, although not that actual brand. And so if the conditions permit, we'll distribute those ice grippers for you to use.
So Drew, I wanted to call attention to something you had said on one of those previous slides there about those parkas that we provide, their sort of insulative value, and just kind of noting on the fact that that is very much your outer layer. What would you suggest to everyone listening in to put underneath that layer?
Well, you want to dress in layers. So under that layer, you want to put another layer, and then another layer, and then another layer. There's a lot of utility. You know, those parkas that we give, they're not thick down parkas, but they do have they are insulated enough that in some conditions they're enough. But I'll start kind of from the base layer and then work toward that outer layer of the Nat Hab parka we provide. So in terms of thermal layer, you want to have long underwear, bottom and tops. That could be wool, that could be synthetic. Very thin. It's just your very first layer. If it's a warm day, you might choose to, in the morning, not put that on. You might leave it back in the hotel room. But most days in Yellowstone in the winter, having that thermal layer is going to be kind of the critical base layer. After that, kind of your mid layer, these are going to be layers that you would be comfortable wearing indoors. So the restaurants can be a little on the warm side. So just, you know, maybe a wool shirt or a fleece jacket that you could take off during that meal if it got too warm. You could leave your parka in the van or the snow coach. And then moving up in warmth, the sort of first of the outer layers might be kind of a warmer, heavy fleece or a down jacket, not a real heavy expedition style parka, but sometimes you'll hear people talk to them or describe them as down sweaters. But a slightly warmer vest or sweater or light down jacket that you could wear under that parka, and that would be during the coldest conditions. And then finally, can't forget gloves. I suggest a shell glove with a thin liner, a hat that covers your ears, and then a neck gaiter or a face mask to cover your face. You know, we don't spend a lot of time outside if the conditions are really harsh, but certainly you're here to view wildlife and you're here to experience these thermal features. So weather independent, we will be spending long periods standing, looking through spotting scopes, walking through geyser basins, and so you want to make sure you're prepared with that layered gear.
Yeah, I can tell you that even though you're having an amazing time looking at wolves, you're not moving around a whole lot, and it is quite cold. So this layering technique is 100% the way to go.
Yeah. Okay, and I just have a couple pictures here depicting certain scenarios. So the picture on the left, you know, during our days in the snow coaches, we're in the vehicles for longer stretches than the days when we're traveling in Nat Hab vans that are driven by your expedition leaders. So your ELs are going to warn you in the morning or the night before and let you know, hey, tomorrow is going to be a lot of vehicle time. You know, you just be prepared for that. You may not need to dress as warmly. So the picture on the left, you know, that's a short stop that we've made to look at Roaring Mountain. It's a big fumarole on the hillside. So if they're just stepping out for a couple of minutes, you might be a little less bundled up. Versus the image on the right, you know, that was quite a cold day, a longer walk at Mammoth, at the Mammoth Terraces. And you can see they're a little more bundled up. They've got their Nat Hab outer shells on. They've got their binoculars. I really can't encourage enough that bring those binoculars with you whenever we are on boardwalks, because you never know what wildlife we might encounter.
So we've got all this gear. You're suggesting bringing all sorts of different layers and hats and gloves and what have you. What's the best way to pack all of that stuff and prepare for this adventure? Not only approaching the trip, but throughout the trip.
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to mention that whether we're in our vans or in the snow coaches, there's plenty of room. So the seat next to you is almost always empty. And so if you have a day pack that has your water bottle, and I do want to emphasize how important it is to bring your water bottle on this trip. Nat Hab's no longer providing water bottles at the welcome presentation. They're going to send it to you prior to the trip. That will be a really critical thing to make sure you have in your day pack. But if you've got, say, that parka that you don't want to wear the entire day, you can always take the parka off and set it on the seat next to you during our time in the vehicles, of course. So plenty of space in the vehicles. But you want to kind of keep your packing limited to two items. So a large duffel of some sort, a wheeled duffel is something flexible and soft-sided is most convenient, although if you have hard-sided luggage, you can accommodate that. So a duffel or a piece of luggage, and then a day pack. And so in that day pack, you're going to have your binoculars, your water, your wallet, any medications you might need. It's important to realize that we will be separated from our luggage during the course of the day. So the luggage is either going to be traveling in a separate vehicle, or it will be traveling utilizing some of the luggage transport services within Yellowstone. So you want to make sure that any critical medications you have on your person, just in case there's a problem with luggage or we're separated from our luggage, which rarely to never happen. Let's see. If you notice this duffel on the lower portion of this image, there's nothing hanging off the outside of it. You do want to have a luggage tag on it, of course, but try to resist the temptation to tie boots or little side bags onto your duffel. It's just really asking for trouble. It's asking for items to be lost. So when you pack for this trip, try to leave a little bit of extra room in your luggage to accommodate the jacket that you, for instance, wear on the airplane, and the travel shoes that you might wear to get to the destination. Because once we give you our boots and our parka, you just need to place in your luggage to stuff that stuff away.
Yeah, thanks for noting that, Drew. It's an important consideration for this trip. Let's get on to the real fun stuff here. What are we going to be doing on this trip? What is everyone here for?
Well, the heart of this trip really, I would say, is the wildlife in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So the reason that we're all here is to experience Yellowstone during the winter months, to experience the wildlife, as I mentioned, living through some of the toughest periods of the season. There's certain aspects of winter in Yellowstone that make wildlife viewing easier. For instance, this coyote in the lower left, wildlife against a white backdrop can be easier to spot. This bighorn sheep in the upper right, bighorn sheep, they're altitudinal migrants. So as the snows get deeper at the higher elevations, they move down to elevations that make it more visible to winter travelers in Yellowstone. Moose, moose are subsisting off willows that grow along roadways, and so during the winter months, those moose really stand out as they're feeding for willows out on the landscape. Some of the other wildlife we can expect to see a lot of are bison, because during the winter, as I mentioned, Yellowstone packs down the snow roads. That actually ends up being easier travel for bison. So there can be groups of hundreds of bison on the road, and you'll quickly learn the term bison jam. Snow coaches and vans, we can't just pass those bison. We have to respect their travel and their pace. And so vehicles can get kind of backed up during the winter behind bison. We'll see some of Yellowstone's iconic wildlife like elk right next to some of Yellowstone's most iconic physical features. This is Electric Peak and the Roosevelt Arch in the Gardner area in the north of Yellowstone. We'll definitely schedule time to enjoy some of the historic features in the park as well as the wildlife.
So talk to us about this next one here. Of course, this is what's on everyone's brain, specifically what it is we're looking at, and then maybe you could set some expectations for wildlife viewing in general and just kind of how that works on a Nat Hab trip.
Sure. Well, this, of course, is a gray wolf, and it's a big part of the reason that our travelers come on this particular adventure. In the winter, the wildlife tend to concentrate in that area to the north that I called the northern range. The reason is that the snow is it's not quite as deep. And so the wildlife like bison and elk, moose, they travel out of the high country down into the areas of less snowfall. That's where the highest concentration of wolves are. Those wolf packs know that during the hardest time of year, those animals move down into the areas with less snow and become their prey. And so why we spend 2 nights in Cook City and why we spend, better part of 2 full days traveling through that northern range is the chances that we have to view wolves. But it's important to recognize that very, very rarely you get a close view of a wolf in the northern range. The reality is that a lot of the viewing of wildlife, including wolves, that we do is through a spotting scope. And it's a great way to experience wildlife. And the best thing about traveling with Nat Hab is that we have quite a few scopes. We've got some really high quality scopes that we set up for you. But scopes can be a challenge to look through. The person next to you can bump it, or it can be windy, and that viewfinder can be a little shaky. So one of the things that Nat Hab Expedition Leaders sort of pride themselves on is their abilities to do what we call phone scoping. And so this is an example of one of our scopes, and you can see on that scope there is an iPhone, in this case, with an adapter that attaches to the lens. When expedition leaders set these scopes up on a distant wildlife feature like a wolf, we'll be taking photos through those viewfinders, through our own phones. And then we can share those photos with you, either directly in the field using AirDrop, or at the end of the expedition, your ELs will put together a Google Drive or a photo drive. And that's an opportunity for us as expedition leaders to post all the photos that we took through those spotting scopes and otherwise. And then it's also an opportunity for our travelers to post the photos that they've taken during the trip to share with other travelers. We are able to help with your interest in phone scoping, but the scopes are quite fragile. And so generally it's going to be the ELs that are setting up the phones with the adapters and taking the photos through the scopes. Now, another feature of our trips are presenters. And so we'll have a number of opportunities for presentations throughout the trip. This photo shows Rick McIntyre, who's reached some degree of fame in the wolf watching world. But we also, Rick's still out in the park, and we may or may not overlap with him during the course of your adventure. But there's the Yellowstone Wolf Project is still a very helpful presence in the northern range, and they're out there the entire winter, every day, tracking the activities of the various packs in Yellowstone. So we may have a chance to have kind of an informal presentation or discussion with somebody from the Yellowstone Wolf Project. Additionally, throughout the course of this trip, other presenters could include a guided docent tour at the National Museum of Wildlife Art. It could include a presentation from some representatives from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. One presenter I want to highlight is Dan Hartman, and Dan is a local photographer and wildlife enthusiast who lives with his wife Cindy just outside Cook City in a place called Silvergate. So Dan and Cindy invite our groups into their home. Dan provides a presentation that talks a lot about the wildlife photography and filmmaking that he's been doing in that part of the world for decades. Also at their home, they have some feeders that they stock primarily for birds, although occasionally we might get lucky and have a pine marten visit. Pine marten is a little weasel that is active summer and winter in Yellowstone, and is depicted here in this picture from Dan Hartman's gallery.
Well, we'll have to give this little one a name one of these days.
Yeah. Yeah. So another big part of this trip beyond wildlife is Yellowstone's geysers, Yellowstone's hot springs, mud pots, fumaroles. These geothermal features are world renowned, and Yellowstone has the highest concentration of these types of features of any place on Earth. So we want to devote time, and time that's well due, to these geothermal features. Now, in the summertime, boardwalks are almost like a conveyor belt in a mall. There's so many people out there in the summer, but in the winter, traveling these boardwalks, it will almost be our groups and only our groups. Visitation is, as Corbin mentioned, visitation is far less during the winter months. But traveling can be a little hazardous along some of these boardwalks. So at areas like Old Faithful, you can see they do some plowing and some clearing of snow and paths up toward that famous geyser. But other boardwalks will just be packed snow. Give me that next slide there.
Yep.
So this is the West Thumb Geyser Basin here. It's a unique geyser basin in that it's right on the shores of Yellowstone Lake, North America's largest alpine lake. So we'll hopefully have time to travel along the boardwalks at West Thumb. But you can see, particularly on the photo on the right, it's very loose snow on the edge of those boardwalks, and it's very, in some cases, it can be quite deep snow. So you really do have to be prepared for all conditions on even a given walk. It could get icy for a few hundred feet, but then be packed snow for the rest of that walk. But again, the beauty of being with the Nat Hab Expedition Leader is we'll be able to prepare you for any given outing, whether it be a short outing or for a morning out viewing wildlife.
And on occasion, we'll potentially have the opportunity to use snowshoes, correct?
Yeah, one of the activities which, as my introductory photo kind of highlighted, one of the activities that I really love on our trips is snowshoeing. Snowshoeing, I do for practical purposes just out my back door. I mean, if I want to fill my bird feeder, I've got to go out there with snowshoes. We get quite a lot of snow here in East Idaho. On our trips, we're using a combination of packed trails, or sometimes like the picture on the right, we may actually be snowshoeing through some deeper powder. But we're always taking a really slow pace. We're making lots of stops to talk about winter ecology and some of the unique geologic features that we encounter in Yellowstone during the winter. You're not going to be forced to snowshoe. It's something that I love to do, and most of our guests really enjoy it. It's a good chance to spend an hour or so away from the vehicles, away from the roads. But it is a completely optional activity. So, or if you think you don't want to slow the group down, we have ops specialists that will be with us on the trip. They're going to be with us when we snowshoe, and so the ops specialist or another EL can take a slower group, and then there can be a slightly faster group that wants to travel a little bit more distance. But again, an optional activity, but I highly recommend you take the opportunity to snowshoe on this departure. Yes, and another activity for this that's very special on this trip, one of my favorite afternoon activities is a sleigh ride through the National Elk Refuge just outside of the town of Jackson, Wyoming. So you can actually see in this image on the right, you can see the sleigh that's pulled by these Percheron draft horses. They're not wildlife, but they have a lot of character, and they're one of the fun parts of the outing is to read the interaction of the driver and the horses. But you can see that National Elk Refuge is right on the edge of the town of Jackson. So, when we finish that sleigh ride, 10 minutes later, we're back in the town of Jackson. So it just really shows how special towns in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem are, where they're literally right up against incredibly large tracts of very wild places. And the residents that live in those towns have to be used to living with wildlife. The sleigh ride drivers, they answer all your questions, and they're incredibly knowledgeable, and they really add a lot to this activity.
And you get to spend a fair amount of time out there with them, right? The sleigh ride experience is about 45 minutes to an hour or so?
It is, and because it's an activity that is, I don't want to say, well, it is sedentary, frankly. I mean, you're going to be paid a lot to look through your viewfinder and through your binoculars. We get really up close and personal with elk. I should mention that, elk are very skittish to people on foot. But these elk in the refuge, they're here just for the winter. During the summer, they travel up into the high country. But during the winter, they concentrate in the refuge, and they're very well used to the sleighs, and they're used to the horses. So you can actually get closer to the elk safely during the sleigh ride than you would be outside of a sleigh.
Yeah, this is kind of a highlight of the trip, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Well, Drew, we have gone through, I think, just about everything. We've covered COVID protocols. We've talked about the greater Yellowstone ecosystem at large, what to expect when you arrive, moving into accommodation and meals and vehicles, clothing, packing, all of that sort of stuff. Is there anything that you feel that's gone left unsaid here before we open this up to questions?
I think the questions will probably guide what more I have to say.
Perfect. Well, with that, Sunny, I think we are ready to open the floor for questions if you've got any for us.
Oh, we got some questions for you.
Perfect.
Thanks, guys. Before we move on to questions, that was fabulous. So clear and thorough and really enticing. I'm very jealous of all the folks who are going to be meeting you up there very shortly. But we do have some questions to start with. Let's see. All right. Just some context. Well, we'll start here. Sorry. Are the documents sent to guests via email, or is it downloadable information? So just before the trip, will guests receive information or downloadable information?
Yeah, the guests will receive a pre-trip email, likely a week or two out before the trip, specifically inclusive of what we call our pre-trip information. It's kind of named for exactly what it is, but they should be receiving that in an email. If you have further questions, you certainly can get onto our website where you will find that same pre-trip information. You'll find itineraries, etc., and you can answer a lot of questions that way.
Excellent. And if folks do come a day before, as you suggested, will anyone meet them at the airport?
We pick up on day one of the trip. So if you are coming in, say your trip starts on January 7th and you decide to come in on January 6th, it will be your responsibility to make your way to the hotel. If you're on the Jackson side, the Lexington Hotel does have a shuttle, and you can look that up on their website and give them a call. If you are on the Bozeman side, unfortunately, Armory does not have a shuttle, but it is a fairly easy Uber ride right there from the airport.
Excellent. You talked about the wonderful meals. Are they included in the price of the package?
They are.
Yes.
Yeah. Every meal will be included in your trip. The only thing that we'll ask you to take care of separately will be alcohol.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit more about tripods? Will you have enough for everybody, or should people, especially folks who are on the photo trip, bring their own tripod?
Sure. During the non-photo trips, we have plenty of tripods, and the tripods are primarily being used for our spotting scopes. And so those tripods, they're not available for photographers on our non-photo departures. You know, as a passionate user of spotting scopes and binoculars and camera gear, if photography is your priority, I highly suggest you bring your own tripod. If your interest in the trip is varied and you want to see wildlife, but you're not as interested in capturing it, we've got all the gear you need. But if you are an avid photographer, I would definitely suggest you bring your own tripod.
Yeah, the way our gear is organized is that we have a matching number of scopes and tripods. While on occasion, in a pinch, we have loaned out a tripod here or there, really they are meant to go with our scopes in the field. So just echoing what Drew said.
Great. When you go to dinner, will there be time to change clothes beforehand?
Drew, I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, we always hope, and I would say 80% of the time, you know, we arrive around 4:30 or 5, and dinner is at about 6 or 6:30. That's what we strive for, is to give people an hour or so to decompress in their room. But if at 4:45 we see a group of wolves on the side of a hill slope in the distance, and we want to take time to set up scopes, and they're the only wolves we've seen, you know, we're going to do that. And that means we could roll in 15 minutes before dinner. But that's not our goal. That's the exception. Our goal is to give about an hour of downtime between arrival and dinner.
Great. What about bathrooms while you're out traveling during the day?
Sure. the Park Service does an amazing job of maintaining bathrooms throughout the park. Your expedition leaders know where all those bathrooms are, and we can give you a heads up as to whether it's an A quality, a B quality, or a let's not talk about quality. But we know where all the restrooms are. We know where the heated restrooms are. Our priority is to make sure that you're comfortable and you're well fed and you're well hydrated. But so we recognize that there's a need for restrooms, and so there's good restroom access throughout the interior of the park during the snow coach drive. The drivers know places where there's heated restrooms within the interior of the park as well.
Excellent. Can you talk a little bit more about the weather, temperatures to expect, how much sun versus snow? I know it's impossible to predict, but can you give us some general idea?
Yeah, well, the trips that are leaving at the end of December, January, obviously the day length is quite a bit shorter. At this latitude, you noticed it. And so I would say that the January trips tend to be a little bit colder in terms of ambient temperatures. We might get lows of, an average low of around 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. We may get days that drop down to 0 or even below 0, but I'd say in January, your average lows would be, 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit above 0. As we get up into those February trips, days start getting longer. We might get a day when it might warm up and be sunny, and you could find that your parka is just too warm to wear, but you might get some high temperatures in the 30s, maybe even the 40s in February. Unfortunately, when we talk about storms, they can really come in any day throughout the Winter Yellowstone season. So it should be said that, these winter trips do require a sense of adventure and flexibility. Storms, there are certain situations and conditions where we just can't physically safely travel, and safety is always our #1 priority. But no matter what alterations we have to make to the itinerary based on weather, you can rest assured that Nat Hab and your expedition leaders are going to do our absolute best to create a trip of a lifetime for you. So storms do happen. They're a reality in this part of the country, and they can happen from day 1 of the season to the final day of the season.
Yeah, and I don't typically like to use 4-letter words on these guest-facing webinars, but wind, of course, is a 4-letter word that we deal with quite often in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So just be mindful, sort of just reiterating the importance of layers on these trips. You may be looking at the weather and it doesn't show that there's a storm necessarily, but you could be high winds, which effectively can present like a storm when you're out in it.
Good clarification there. So a little bit more about the photography aspect of the trip. Can you explain a little bit about how a photo trip differs from a regular departure?
Yeah, Drew, I don't know if you want to take this one. I'm happy to.
Go for it.
Yeah, our photo trips are, let's put it this way, you're essentially getting a very similar trip, right? You're seeing the northern range, you're out looking for animals just like you would on a non-photo departure. The photo trip is just going to be very much focused on getting those photos. So you might forego a a walking experience in lieu of some great wildlife aspect that you have just seen. There will be focus on sunrise and sunsets where applicable, where logistically it makes sense, and you'll just be spending more time behind the camera than a broader sense of Yellowstone. Drew, does that kind of cover it? Anything you want to add?
Yeah, that does cover it. I do want to just mention that travel distances are long on this trip. Yellowstone is a 2 million acre park, and we're traveling all the way across the length of that park during the period of the year when travel times are the slowest. So even on photo trips, we'll build in as much time as possible for photography opportunities. And as Corbin said, that might be in lieu of a snowshoe outing or a presenter. But there's certain, when it comes to, we still have to get to the next location for our dinner and for laying our heads down on the pillow. So just keep in mind, even on the photo trips, there's got to be that travel time built into the day to get to our next hotel.
One more question about cameras. Do they tend to freeze in the cold weather? And would you recommend some sort of lens cover?
Well, whether you're talking about
Go ahead,
cameras or whether you're talking about binoculars or spotting scopes, one of the big challenges is that transition from the warm hotel room out into the cold vehicle. So, you know, what we do with our scopes and our binoculars is we bring them in at night and let them warm up because there's a lot of mass, there's a lot of glass. And then we let the vehicles warm up in the morning. And so we're bringing warm equipment into a warm vehicle. So those binoculars are going to be less apt to fog as you bring them up to your face. And the same is true with your cameras. When you're out of the vehicles and you're set up and everything begins to cool down, you want to be really mindful of your breath. Particularly if you're wearing a face mask for COVID, or if you're wearing like a neck gaiter, that can really concentrate your breath and it can cause the optics to fog up. So pulling down the face mask can help a lot. Letting your equipment cool down gradually and then starting your photography can be a useful approach. And I always recommend a lens cap for sure, just to protect your equipment.
Yeah, and I would say that if you're going to be at a location, say you're looking at wolves in the Lamar Valley, and you yourself want to hop in the vehicle to warm up, I might suggest, if all circumstances are appropriate, to leave your camera in the cold so that you're not changing from hot to cold. That just welcomes moisture and just some things you don't want in your expensive camera equipment.
And I'll also mention that one more thing, a lot of us photograph with our iPhones, and the battery life is really impacted by cold. So keeping your equipment warmer in order to keep, like Corbin's point was to keep it from fogging up, but that cold will also affect battery life. So keeping smaller devices, smaller phones in your parka against your body will help preserve that battery life.
Excellent. I think we have time for just one more question. Can you review the equipment that Nat Hab will provide? You mentioned a parka and boots. Can you specify again about walking sticks, binoculars, any other gear, just to have that really clear for everybody?
Sure, I can run down that list. So Nat Hab will provide pack boots, warm pack boots, a parka, hand warmers and toe warmers, trekking poles, ice grippers, and snowshoes should you be interested in doing a snowshoe outing.
Excellent. And then binoculars, there'll be a couple to pass around, or should people bring their own binoculars?
Nope, sorry, and binoculars as well. So we've got a pair of binoculars for each guest, so you'll have your own pair.
Excellent. Well, again, you guys, thank you so much for such a thorough preparation. I'll pass it back to you for any closing comments.
Yeah, Drew, I'll let you finish here, but thank you, Sunny, and thank you, Drew, for taking the time to go through this. We've been doing these for a couple of years now, and I think that they're wildly valuable to the success of our trip and the success of our guest experience and preparing everyone for the trip that they're to embark on. So, thank you.
Yeah, and I just, looking outside right now, it's snowing pretty hard, and I think we're going to have a really plentiful snow season, and I'm just very excited to get out and share the wonders of Yellowstone's geothermal features and the wonders of Yellowstone's wildlife with all of you. And really just, I want to reiterate that a big part of winter in Yellowstone is, again, just the solitude and the silence. And so I look forward to sharing that piece with you all during the winter season.
Sounds great, guys. I want to thank everybody who tuned in. Please join us again tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I'll conclude the webinar. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep.